Welcome back to our podcast, Regulation Matters, a clear conversation. Once again, I'm your host, Lyon Dempsey. I'm currently the Chief Compliance Officer with Riccobeni Associates Family Dentistry. We have practices in North Carolina, South Carolina, and Virginia. I've also been a past board member and past president for Clear. As many of you are aware, the Council on Licensure Enforcement and Regulation, or CLEAR, is an association of individuals, agencies, and organizations that comprise the international community of professional and occupational regulation. This podcast is an opportunity for you to hear about important topics in our regulatory community. Now, today's topic is strategies to mitigate cheating on licensure and certification exams. Our guests are leaders in exam security, here to share insights on protecting the integrity of high-stakes testing. We welcome Wally Dalrymple from ETS, Roddy Mead from Prometric, and Harry Samet with Pearson VUE. Thank you all for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
Excellent. Well, CLEAR's Examination Resources and Advisory Committee, or ERAC as we call it, proposed taking a look at this topic based on examples of security incidents we hear about from our CLEAR members, as well as the plethora of information on the internet showing various ways that candidates attempt to cheat on high-stakes exams. For regulators, protecting an exam means protecting the pathway into a licensed profession and ultimately protecting the public. So we want to talk to you as security experts about the most effective strategies you've seen in the industry to defend against this type of cheating. So first, let's get to know a little about your backgrounds. Can you each take a minute to briefly introduce yourselves? And we'll start with Wally, then Roddy, and then Harry, please.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Lyon. As you mentioned, my name is Wally Dalrymple. I'm the Chief Security Officer at ETS. And I've only been at ETS actually for a little over 3 years, but I've been in the information security industry for 30 years. So looking forward to a good conversation today.
Yeah, so I'm Roddy Mead. I'm our Director of Global Security Operations here at Prometric. I have been with Prometric and running our security team for about 20 years, actually. So I've been in the assessment industry for quite a while. We are a large global testing vendor, testing millions of candidates in multiple modalities, test centers, remote, even paper pencil still. So happy to be here.
Hi, my name is Harry Samet. I am the Director of Special Investigations for Pearson VUE. I've only been in the exam security industry for about 6 years, but prior to that, I spent 21 years as a special agent of the FBI, and before that, 9 years in naval intelligence. And so the techniques that Pearson VUE, that the team brings to bear on the exam security issue, are the same that the law enforcement and military and civilian intelligence communities use. And Lyon, I think you hit the nail on the head in your preamble there with protecting the pathway into a credential and thereby protecting society. That's really the way we look at it.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys. Now, little known fact, I did a little bit of exam security back in the day when I was working for the dental board. We were giving the dental board exam in the state of North Carolina. And so the two investigators, myself and one other investigator, we would walk around and just look at things and never saw anything that looked suspicious. But that was my little toe tap, if you would, or toe touch into exam security. But let's jump right into this and maybe talk about remotely proctored exams, because that seems to be something that happens a lot now. Obviously, we saw a lot of regulatory organizations shift to this during the pandemic. And certainly it's a different situation with some unique challenges, when the candidates and the proctor are in different locations. So in a remotely protected environment, a candidate might think that there's maybe more opportunity to access devices, and such that maybe where they've got some stored information. So what techniques can be used to mitigate kind of the risk of a desktop handheld or wearable technology being accessed while a candidate takes a remote proctored examination? And Roddy, let's start with you.
Sure. I think where it starts is trying to secure the environment as much as you can, which is a challenge, as you can imagine, in the remote modality. But what a lot of the testing vendors do is they'll start with a 360 room scan. So that candidate will have to either using an external webcam or using their laptop, they'll have to scan their entire room 360 degrees. The proctors will be watching for anything, any prohibited devices, any paper, any notes, anyone else in the room that may give them assistance. Those scans can be pretty thorough too. They'll look under the desk, they'll look under the chair, they'll look at the four corners of the room, looking for any hidden cameras, things like that. So it starts with that. Then a lot of the vendors will do an inspection of the candidate's person. So the same thing happens at testing centers. So the candidate will be asked to pull up their sleeves, make sure there's no writing on them, turn their pockets inside out, show their eyeglasses really close up to the camera, making sure they're not the new Meta glasses, Ray-Ban Meta glasses or spy camera glasses that we've seen for years out there. I think it starts with that. And then there's other new technologies that a lot of vendors are releasing now with second camera. So a lot of vendors have an offering now where you can use the candidate's camera actually and turn it into a surveillance camera. So they'll take a picture of a QR code. That video feed will immediately start streaming to the proctor, and they can set up that second camera as basically a surveillance camera capturing more of the candidate's environment. So all of those things, just a few, is where it starts.
Yeah, Wally.
Lena, if Line, if I could add to that, because I think Roddy's spot on. Second camera, it's about controlling the environment, and there's so many benefits that come with the second camera. I know that it also could cause a little bit of an inconvenience maybe at the start of the test by getting the second camera in stream, but protecting the integrity of the test, the value is so great. Getting that room scan, and there's one particular threat that we see in videos, to add on to what Roddy was saying, is we call it follow the wires, because there are threats where people will have wires running into another room or into multiple devices. So with that 360 view and that second camera in the room, and it is about controlling the environment, or at least understanding the environment for the test taker. But you would be surprised to see how many wires are coming from certain devices and where those wires are really going to, because we know that there's things out there like hardware peripheral, like HDMI splitters, that are really hard to detect with a secure browser, if not almost impossible. So that 360 camera, that second camera providing that room view, allows us to not only see if there's someone in the room, which there shouldn't be, right? Or if someone comes into the room, or if someone's hiding behind curtains and those type of things, or underneath of desks, but also following the wire. So there's lots of threats that the second camera mitigates.
That's very interesting. I had when I think Roddy was talking, I had flashbacks when you talking about the glasses, I think it was Fast Times at Ridgemont High movie. They had the everything was written on the inside of their
Oh
sunglasses,
yeah.
and they were looking at it. I mean, there were all kinds of things like that back in the day, but it's obviously the technology has changed significantly as we look at this. So when I guess what about an in-person test center, like where techniques can be used to minimize the risk of candidate accessing handheld and wearable technology during the exam? So how is that different? So again, back to you, Roddy, if you would.
I think in the test center environment, it's actually somewhat easier to control because in that case, you do control the environment. There's a lot of threat vectors we're trying to control, the environment being one, software, hardware, candidate behavior. In the test center environment, you have a lot more control over a lot of those. So most test centers, as soon as the candidate walks in, they're on camera, they're on video and audio. As soon as they walk in, there's lockers, secure lockers where they need to store all their belongings, everything that they have with them, and they're not allowed to bring anything into the test room other than what the proctors give them. Most test centers and vendors do the same sort of security inspections that I discussed, of the candidate's person, having them turn their pockets inside out, inspecting eyeglasses, all of that. A lot of test centers even have metal detector wands. So you're scanning the candidate, and we're not looking for weapons. We're looking for concealed devices of any kind. They're checking their ears for Bluetooth devices, anything like that. And then once all those inspections are done and they're pretty much clean and they're sat at a workstation, they're again on video surveillance, being monitored during their entire exam. The proctors have the video right up in front of them. They can see the candidate's entire hands, desktop, all of those kind of things. All of that's not to say it's not impossible to sneak in a concealed device, but I think it's much more difficult in the test center environment.
Harry, anything to add on that?
Yeah. You know, it's a technical threat, right? Using devices, concealed cameras, unauthorized study aids. is certainly there's a technical dimension to the threat. And so we apply a technical solution, but then there's also, human factors. And so one of the things that we are fairly aggressive about doing is not only introducing new technology when appropriate, but training our proctors on a continuous basis on the new threats. So my team, we see it all. We see the good, the bad, and mostly the ugly on a very regular basis. And so we synthesize the results of our investigation into regular updates for our proctors. So they know that the current trends that the bad guys are using might be a concealed button camera or, the meta glasses or any of the, technical vectors that we're concerned about. The other thing, though, that we do is we introduce technology, um, designed to detect not just the visual signature because we've tried it, we've tested it and trialed it. Really hard for the naked eye to pick up some of these concealments, right? The intelligence community and law enforcement have been using concealed recording devices for over 100 years. But one of the things that's difficult is for the human eye to spot them, right? They're called concealments for a reason. And so we're now introducing technology that helps to do that. Not just the enhanced visual signature, but also the RF, the radio frequency signature coming off of those devices as well.
And Harry, just as a point of clarification, we're really talking about two different things here. We're talking about at least security wise, one, people cheating on the exam itself, but also maybe recording or taking away some of the exam that they could then share with somebody else. Is that another aspect of this? And we may touch on this in a little bit, but is that kind of for our listeners basically the two big things we're looking at?
Yeah, one of the things that when we train our proctors and when we speak to industry, we say the two biggest threats line are just what you said, right? One is content harvesting or cheating for yourself, and then the other is proxy testing. And unfortunately, as the technology has become more complicated and more user friendly for the bad guys, the same systems can essentially accomplish both, right? You can help that person cheat with the concealment with the device they smuggle in, and you can also in some circumstances capture content that you can then sell or distribute. So
Doing
it's a
that
double
mining.
threat. Yeah.
Right. Awesome. Well, what about preventing access to written resources? I think back, at least certainly for me in high school, we would have like final exams, and they would say, as much as you could fit on a 3x5 card, or you could have like in my math class, we could have certain equations and things like that, or chemistry. We could have those things with us kind of as a cheat card, but obviously we don't want that during a licensure exam. In a test center or remotely proctored environment, I guess what techniques are used to mitigate the risk of written resources being accessed when a candidate takes in an examination, and maybe how does that differ between maybe an in-person and remote? And Roddy, if you would on that one.
Sure. Again, test center, it's a little bit easier. Most proctors are watching the candidates the entire time. Most test center vendors, when they provide like scratch paper or erasable noteboards to the candidates, they're colored. So they're different colors. There's nothing white. Most vendors don't give the candidates anything white. So cheat sheets or something like that jump out and stand out very quickly. And again, the proctors are watching them through the video cameras the entire time. They're walking through the testing room constantly looking at them. So we still see that from time to time. You still see some low-tech cheating. They sneak in, cheat sheets in their shoe or sock or, pull them out. Proctors are pretty good at detecting that though and catching it. And in the remote world, it's kind of the same things I mentioned. So, it's the room scan, it's inspecting their person. The one other thing you have in the remote world, most vendors have is AI assisted proctoring. So you have AI watching the candidate's behavior. If they're frequently looking down at something constantly or looking, away from the camera and they appear distracted, there's AI alerts that come up. And many vendors will have someone intervene at that point. They might have a security agent connect and have them do another room scan or ask them, to show them certain areas of their desktop.
That's very interesting. So I guess kind of a follow-up question to that. What happens when, the candidate has to take a bathroom break or needs a break because it's in a long exam and stuff. What kind of techniques do you guys extend to these candidates, or what do you do in order to make sure they're not accessing something that's been unauthorized or materials like that, especially when you're doing it. Obviously, you've got a controlled environment if you're doing it in the testing center. If they step outside for a smoke break, that might be a little different, right? But at home, if they're doing this or a different, what do you guys do with that? And Harry, let's start with you on that one.
It's a 360 degree bubble around the exam, right? So the way if we're talking about scheduled breaks, the way you do that is, you have the test structured so they can't navigate backwards, right? So if they're going to get up, and they've already passed that part of the exam, they can't go back and look up something that they've already seen and fill in the answer there. So exam design. Um, there's also proctor training, whether it be online or in the test center. We have sensitized our teams, the watchers, to understand that that's an inflection point, right? When a person, if a person is going to cheat or embark in misconduct, often that occurs immediately following a break, right? Because that is a good staging area for them. So enhanced vigilance by the proctors. In the test center environment, that also includes use of those devices that I talked about, right? That might try and detect either an infrared or a Bluetooth signal. If a device is going to be emitting or is going to be active, it may be right after a break, whether it be scheduled or unscheduled. So again, a combination of technical factors, and then also human vigilance by the proctors.
Wally?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with Harry. It's in the test center we see things like if you talked about line bathroom breaks. So we will see seat switching, right? So someone will go in the bathroom, someone that's in the exact same clothing looks very similar to that person. They will come out of the bathroom, but yet they're a professional test takers, so they'll go do that. And I think that what Harry's talking about is with the proctor training, right? So we have seen these type of cheating methods. So there's not too many that Roddy and Harry they haven't seen already in the test center with seat switching and looking for suspicious behavior. Also, I think it's really important the way the CCTV cameras are positioned. A lot of times, just the room view, but also a top-down view, because we will still see. Roddy was talking about the low-tech cheating, especially in the test center, where they'll come in with a sleeve underneath of their shirt, and on the sleeve, they'll have answers or questions or something to help them prompt them to get through the test assisted, you could say. So I think it's a combination of we understand the different threats in the test center. We understand the different threats that we see for remote proctoring. And then we have processes that support the proctors to train them to look for these type of things. And once you see it over and over again, you sort of become trained, right? You become trained on how to identify it. And so that's how we build and we focus on which policies we follow and what controls to put in. Because as Harry is mentioning, it's the technology has to complement the proctor. Otherwise, you're just putting in technology for the sake of potentially catching someone. But if the technology actually enables the proctors both remotely and in the test center, now you're actually targeting your controls and you'll be more efficient. And at the end of the day, the goal is to protect the honest test taker.
I mean, that's just to me, it's just fascinating. I'm a chief compliance officer, right? I've been working in regulation, prior to that for a long time, and like some of the techniques that you're like, I've not even thought of, oh, that's a way to do that, right? I guess that's good that I'm not thinking that way, but still, just crazy. Now, I know there are all kinds of videos online where self-described cheaters advise candidates for a remotely proctored exam to do all sorts of things to thwart the exam security. I've heard of things like, and this, since we got ready for this, I started looking at some of the stuff, changing the lighting, right? So that eye scanning technology doesn't work properly, which I might want to do in my Tesla sometimes, because it always knows that if I try to adjust the stereo, it says, hey, put your eyes on the road. But I'm sure that there are a lot of different things like this that you guys are aware of. Are there, I think, for these would-be cheaters, are there things that you guys can do or things that in the industry that have done that are effective measures and best practices to kind of defend against this type of cheating? And Wally, why don't I start with you on that one?
Yeah, so line what we see is they'll advertise online, right, in different social media sites as typically like a test prep type of organization. But when you go behind the scenes, they're essentially organized cheating rings, and they're around the world, and there's no place that's really safe or secure from organized cheating because they do travel, and their primary objective is to make money, right? That's why they do this. And so what we've done is a couple different things to help identify. We have a pretty good idea where these sources live today and what sites they advertise on because we'll perform undercover investigations. So we'll go in and we'll identify who they are and where they like to sell their services. We even see some of them, from a test center perspective, and we've partnered with Roddy and seen this as well, is where known bad actors, the people that are selling tests trying to sell test content and cheating services, they'll go into a test center and they'll try to bribe a test center administrator, right? So they work, right, 8 to 5, if not even longer, and they have an objective to go in and try to, it's unfortunate that we do have people that will pay money for cheating services as opposed to just going in and taking the exam and passing it like the honest test taker would. But we do have these controls put in place to mitigate these bad actors from coming into our environment.
Harry, any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, one of the things that kind of the techniques that we've applied is what the military or law enforcement would call human intelligence, human. Again, rather than relying solely on the technical data that we're vacuuming in during these exams, we'll also use human collectors. The two biggest that we'll employ, one will be undercover operatives, either online undercovers, which is a lower level of undercover, right? You're not exposing a person actually physically to the bad guys, they're just engaging them online. That's something we do in-house. We have certified undercover employees on our team who pose as either candidates or bad actors just to kind of see what the bad guys are doing to collect evidence and intelligence on the bad guys. And then we also use in-person undercovers, which are, an order of magnitude more complicated, right? Because you have to then put a person potentially in a risky situation. And, we use vendors for that because we don't have the internal resources, but we use the technique often. Those two types of undercover operations. And then the other one, the third one, that we use is the recruitment of human sources, and that is actually getting bad guys to work for us. That's a little bit more difficult than when I was in the FBI. I don't have the ability to go out and meet the bad guys in foreign countries like I used to do. But we will certainly try and engage them where we can and get them to come on board and work for us. And we've seen some pretty good success with that in getting these guys to cooperate with our investigations. It's been a windfall of intelligence when you can get someone to compromise their own criminal organization. And, that goes for the drug cartels as much as it does for, folks who cheat on exams. And so, hand in hand with the technical stuff are the human factors collecting from people.
Awesome. So I think I've seen this happen at least when I have an IT issue. Our VP of IT actually his office is right across from mine, but he can access my computer, right? And he can take over it and he can see everything I'm seeing from that remote thing. And usually there's like a green bar or something like that that comes across there. But like are people doing that? I mean, is it possible that a candidate tries to set up, some type of remote desktop software so that a proxy test taker can basically control the computer and answer for them? And if so, like what techniques can you guys use to kind of defeat that, if you would? I think without getting too heavy into the technical side of things, but from a high level, Roddy, like what are you guys doing for that?
So, I mean, I think most vendors are pretty much the same, so I'm not giving away any secrets. But at a high level, I mean, it starts with the lockdown browser. So it's the technology that's launched on the candidate's workstation. So if you have a strong lockdown browser, there's an application on their machine they need to launch that locks them in with the exam. It does a couple of things. So it can control keystrokes, block certain keystrokes like Control Alt Delete, things like that, trying to switch user accounts, trying to get into Explorer, cut, copy, paste, all of that kind of stuff. It restricts them from that. It will log a lot of their activities. So a lot of vendors have logs and can pull back everything that's running on the candidate's workstation. So if there is suspicion of something like that going on, they can have some evidence of it. But at the end of the day, you see these ads, and Wally's right. They're in China, they're in India, they're often overseas in the Middle East, and they say, pay us $3,000, we can take the exam for you. We can defeat any vendor's lockdown browser. They all sort of say the same thing. Some cases it's true. If there's most lockdown browsers work with a deny list or a blacklist. If they're using some sort of application that's not on that list, you might be able to get through. But all of the vendors are constantly adding to that software, constantly building it. Our cybersecurity team is constantly, enhancing it. I'm sure ETS and Pearson view it exactly the same way. So, I mean, that's how it starts with the technology. Your lockdown browser, your logging, the cybersecurity protections you have in place to block that. And I will say just on that, I mean, think about the candidates that sign up for these services. That's a pretty big risk. They're going out to organize criminals and saying you can log into my desktop and connect to my desktop and make changes on my machine. That is a huge risk. You don't know what they're putting on your machine. And we've even seen cases where those proxy testers will then turn around and extort the candidate because they didn't pay them enough. They want them to pay more. They'll tell them they're going to notify their employer. They're going to notify their exam sponsor. They notify us. We've gotten a few of those. So it's a pretty big risk they're taking in doing that.
Wow. Yeah, Wally.
Yeah, I can add to that as well. So when you have to fight technology with technology, right? So and that does start with an unmanaged endpoint and the secure browser and lockdown browser that Roddy was talking about. But also, I think it also starts with technology before the candidate gets in front of the computer as well. So it's the identification of the person, right? So it's their ID. If they're using a fake credentials, it's identifying where they're registering from. So we'll see, test taker registers in Nigeria, but then less than 24 hours, they're in, Utah. Okay, so some of those things create alerts and cause suspicion. So it is also about understanding the who's going to take the test before they take the test and getting as much information as you can. So then the person sitting in front of the camera is who they say they are. And there is an emerging threat with deep fakes out there, and those are really hard to detect because the person sitting in front of this camera isn't necessarily the person taking the test. Could be an imposter, right? But it's really hard because they're using technology to fool the proctor, and the proctor, would not be able to tell the difference. But there are mitigating controls. It gets to the identification, could be some biometrics, so that it's not just the face, right? It could be the voice, it could be other biometrics. But then also even things like the second camera that you wouldn't think about, because if this camera in front of me is creating a deep fake of I'm Roddy and Roddy's taking the test for me. The second camera isn't running the deepfake software. So if you have those two camera views, you would see two different faces. That would be another, for the proctor, another alert to say, hey, wait a minute, the person that's in front of this camera isn't the same person that we're seeing on the second camera. So these controls complement each other. And I think that's what we do in this industry is we build controls that build on each other. And so if one control gets, bypassed, there's another control that these bad actors might not know that we have in place. So as I know, Line, we won't share all of our secrets, right? Because we're always trying to keep up or try to stay ahead to protect the integrity of the product.
Well, and it sounds like too, like you guys all have either some proprietary type of uh, browser or some type of app that people have to log into to access this information. But is it still also possible that they could have some other app that's quietly running in the background on their computer that basically would, be able to read the screen or take screenshots for content or utilizing AI? And we touched very briefly on AI just a moment ago when we were talking about, being able to recognize when the head goes up and down or whatever. But like, are those kind of things happening? And I guess what strategy have you guys used to I guess kind of catch, if you would, those threats? And since I didn't talk to you, Harry, on that last one, let's start with you on that.
Yeah. So yes, one of the things that we're doing to combat AI is employing AI, right? So we do that as well. I think I probably cannot go much deeper than that, but I'll say we are making full use of AI in our security features. But what I'll also talk about, and I think is safe to talk about, um, we also are looking at um, reducing demand for illicit services, right? So you're always going to have a candidate who, a small proportion of the candidate body who is going to seek to commit misconduct. We're trying to make that number ever smaller. And so we look at that two ways. One way is through education. During touch points with the candidates, whether it's our clients that we deliver exams for or us, we seek to educate the clients as to the risks. I think it was Wally who said they're engaging with cyber criminals. So we point that out. We point out that they have the potential to be caught because we're spending lots of dollars and blood, sweat, and tears in catching them. And so that they're taking a risk from the people that they conspire with. They're taking a risk from their exam provider. And so it's not worth it. And so education is a huge element of our trying to reduce their demand. And then the second one is deterrence, right? Some people, as my mother would say, some people aren't going to listen ever. And so we have to make examples of those folks. And we do that by catching them, providing the information to our clients and the evidence to our clients, and then hoping that they will make swift and painful examples of them so that they tell their friends, right? I fought the law and the law won, right? I tried to cheat on an exam. It didn't go well. I got caught and I suffered a revocation of my scores and potentially up to a lifetime ban, or in really serious cases, criminal prosecution. We've helped law enforcement agencies put folks in jail. And so, we want to educate and we want to deter along with all the other controls.
Excellent. Roddy?
Yeah, I'd say the same thing. I mean, it's that deterrence and the security awareness out there of the consequences of what could happen is really powerful. And we even have a lot of clients now that are even starting to, they will notify the candidate's employer when they're caught. We have a few clients that will put out a press release when they've banned someone from their program. So it's public facing, it's, public shaming. Those kind of deterrents are pretty powerful and pretty helpful.
Anything else to add, Wally?
Yeah, I would just to add to that is where Harry was going. It's a crime, right, to commit fraud on an exam. So many countries and our goal is not prosecution, right, but our goal is to protect the integrity of our company's products. And sometimes that leads to prosecution by our organizations because it does set an example. When everything is online, and when you're online and your picture's up there and you're being called out because you were part of, a cheating organization or paid a cheating organization, that's your personal reputation now that's at stake. And maybe that's a hard thing to recover from because that could infect, as Roddy was talking about, your employment status and people, looking for other opportunities that you might apply for. They're like, you know what, I saw you online. And again, it's about that deterrent. And believe it or not, we spend a lot of money across organizations putting these programs in place, but sometimes, and it's really hard to measure, the deterrent is actually the most effective control that we have because people will hear and understand that it's not worth it. And at the end of the day, they won't take that risk.
Now, look, back in the day when I was finishing up my master's degree, there there were times when people had different exams. Usually, like we had to do some type of oral exam of some sort, and we would talk amongst ourselves after that, and it was never about trying to find what the content was. It was more about the stress experience that you went through. Like, what was the most challenging thing that they asked you, right? It wasn't about trying to know that it was just we were just in this boat together. But I imagine when you're doing an online exam like that, there are boxes that people have to check that basically say, look, I agree not to share content. And, just like my thought process, they're innocent enough in that they're not necessarily thinking that I'm sharing the exam information or content that I shouldn't be sharing. But what have you guys done any new approaches or have new approaches that make this maybe more persuasive or memorable to them when they, take this or click that box saying, hey, don't share this content to make them understand, to basically discourage them from doing exactly what we were doing back then? And Harry, how about you?
Yeah, one of the ways we've done that, so we've done a pretty um I won't say exhaustive, but extensive study of candidate agreements, right? We kind of have at the end of a couple years of really looking at candidate agreements, we have a pretty good idea of what we want them to say. In terms of what you just said, line, don't share this, don't share this with your friends, don't sell it, God forbid, don't sell it, all those things. The second question came with how we present it, right? We know the what of what we want to say, but we want to make it persuasive and we want to make it stick. And so what we've been doing is engaging our marketing team and our clients' marketing teams. And so let's do a creative and thoughtful education campaign around why you don't share, around the security risks and those things. Obviously, one of the things I brought with me from the military was taking the threat information, taking what the bad guys are doing, and making sure everybody in your unit knows. And so we're not very siloed over here. With in security, we brief, every team. And when I first came aboard, people were like, why is security talking to marketing so much? And the answer is because, we need marketing to educate our clients and our candidates on the threats that we're seeing. And so that's kind of that's our approach.
Makes great sense. Roddy?
Yeah, I think it's the same sort of approach. So as far as the candidates and deterrence and making them aware, we try and do that at multiple points. So it starts even when they register with us. So there is candidate consent agreements, and in those agreements, they're notified of several things. Like we will use it will say we will use video, we will use biometrics. We may pick up things from your machine, your device, if you're testing remotely, your IP address, your device ID, your MAC address, all of those kind of things. We're gathering up those and we're going to use those for enforcement and fraud investigation. And we'll let them know up front before they've even tested with us. Then they're registering that that's happening. Then when they show up at a testing center, again, there's test center regulations. It talks about the consequences of what could happen if you're caught cheating or caught in misconduct including prosecution, potential prosecution if they're stealing exam content. And then right when they take the exam, there's another agreement, kind of the agreement that Harry was mentioning, candidate conduct, non-disclosure, NDA agreement, all of those. So it's just multiple points. We're warning them, this is what could happen. This is the evidence we'll have against you. It could go very badly for you if you are involved in cheating or exam theft.
So I know that you mentioned data. Like there's a lot of data from these exams itself. I know that you guys provide that to your test sponsor or the regulatory organization with kind of a data forensic report. That basically analyze exam data to look for unusual patterns that might indicate, some type of cheating. And that does seem like an effective exam security tool, but I guess I would say the results are not always conclusive. Is that what I'm understanding? And then, so what should, from the regulatory perspective, what should a regulatory organization do if something is flagged in the forensic analysis? So, like, what do you recommend in terms of decision making when the only evidence is this data forensics, not necessarily the fact that we caught somebody? And so, Harry, let's start with you on that.
Yeah, so we use data for, I mean, to all of the psychometricians out there, mad respect for what you do. I was a political science major, so I don't pretend to understand it, although I'm a huge believer. We use data forensics as what the FBI would call a tripwire. So essentially, data forensics tells us something is wrong, but like you said, Lion, it's not conclusive, right? It's never a slam dunk. It's not, to use a legal term, it's not beyond a reasonable doubt. that something happened. And so what it does for us is it cues us that we need to investigate. And so that's where my team comes in. And then we conduct a thorough investigation using all of our techniques, with data forensics being a tripwire. There's times when we can't find anything, right? There's times when data forensics will indicate something happened. We will investigate thoroughly and can't find anything. And then we have to, go to the client and say, this is why you get paid the big credentialing bucks. You have to make a decision now. Often the good news is that they can just, revoke the results and validate the results and do a do-over. It's not life and death, but data forensics for us is a tripwire. It's not a final arbiter of a decision.
Wally?
Yeah, I agree with Harry. It's and it also it's the we call them fraud alerts, right? So it's an indication of potential fraud. So it gives us something where we might bring in a test security specialist to come in and help the proctor see what's going on. Because the goal with the data is because data is helps you make decisions based off of what your policies are. So the sooner you get access to data or you know about it, the quicker you can make decisions, or it gives you at least time. So if you see something during a proctor sees something, many fraud alerts during, maybe the test taker is just literally, hitting enter and going through the questions that should take you an hour and a half and they're doing it in 20 minutes, right? That could lead to something that, like Harry was talking about, they might have a camera on their person that you're not able to detect, or they've got the glasses that are more AI advanced than they with a Gen AI bot than they were the previous versions were. So how they behavior and how people take your exam, you measure that, and then you measure the behavior for different people, and you use that data forensics information. And it could be their time on the task. It could be tied to registration data. It could also be like geolocation. So registering in New York and then all of a sudden you're in LA. It's all of those type of fraud alerts. In typically most organizations, the more fraud alerts you have, helps you make a decision or at least gives you a direction to go down. So, it's not one or two fraud alerts line, it's many, many, many. And you take all that information and the faster you can make a decision based off that information. Because if reasonable doubt, if you're not sure, then give a voucher, take it over again, no harm, no foul, right? But at least you have something to move forward with, because it's really hard to keep up with the new AI type of fraud capabilities, and even where Gen AI and that whole area is going to, really hard to keep up on the technology. So what we do have is we have who you are, or at least we think who you are, and then we have what you're doing in front of us at taking that exam and how you respond to completing it.
I'm glad to know that you take multiple things in case, because I'm one of those that used to take exams very fast. I was always the first to finish, right? And I didn't second guess stuff. If I would go with my first response and I didn't come back, I didn't circle it to come back to it. So I might have gotten flagged back then. But I guess for not to give any real insight to any of our cheaters that might be listening on this podcast, but I guess what are some of your, I guess, better automated indicators that can be used during assessment to kind of help identify cheating behaviors? I mean, obviously, what we just mentioned there, the speed of taking the exam might be one of those things, but what are some of the other things like that? Without, again, let's not give away too many secrets, but Rodney, we'll start with you on that.
Sure. I think for remote, some of the AI alerts that I was mentioning before, the way the candidate's moving, there's AI that has object detection now. So if something quickly comes in the camera view that we think is a cell phone or notes, those kind of things. The way the forensics that we were just describing, what I see happening is they're moving. We're using AI to automate those forensics. So it used to be the psychometricians used to run all these formulas and macros and things like that, and it would take weeks to get these score analysis and find someone who's suspected cheating. With AI now, all of that's being automated, and it's slow. It's moving more towards real-time data forensics, where you can detect while the candidate is taking the test. If they're moving through the test in an aberrant way, if they're clicking A for every single answer or just blowing through it, it can flag that result and set it aside for investigation, the investigation steps that Harry and Wally mentioned. We see a lot more of that going on today. And I think it's going to continue to move in that direction.
Harry?
Yeah, we have so many different, without naming any of them, but we have so many different data forensics elements, and you're right, Line. One of them obviously is time. Yeah. But there's over 100 data forensics things that it would be really hard for any candidate, to or any proxy tester to kind of fool the AI driven data forensics that we do just because we're looking at so many different factors. I mean, that in itself would drive anomalous behavior if they were concentrating really hard on trying to defeat it. So, the beauty of, and again, I was a convert to the beauty of data forensics. But the beauty of data forensics is so many different factors with how the candidate is interacting with the exam are taken into account. And there's also factors that include things they do before the exam that are kind of folded in there that it would be really hard for someone to convincingly, fool it. It's not to say it couldn't happen, but there's a lot of things we look at.
That's fascinating. Obviously, one kind of theme I keep hearing during this conversation today is AI, right? And as we move further along in this time frame, I think it's going to be a bigger player in a lot of this stuff, both from the cheating perspective, that's going to ramp up some, obviously, but also in the ability to recognize it from you guys' perspective. I think just in general, this has been a very valuable discussion, very interesting for me. I think our listeners, especially like regulators, can take a lot of reassurance from hearing about the strategies that you guys have put in place, the technologies that are already in place to kind of protect exam integrity, which is fantastic. But before we close, kind of like a kind of a look ahead, given the experience that you guys have, all three of you in this industry, what security challenges, enhancements do you see coming in the future? Like where do we go next? And let's start with Harry on that. We'll go to Roddy and then finish with Wally.
So we're continuing to build on the 360 bubble. One of the things that I've been surprised um, by the creativity of the technical team, the product ownership team, is just how much use they've made of the data that we gather when we interact with the candidates. And so it's not necessarily on the exam, right? I think I talked about it. I think we've all talked about it, that there's lots of different times we're interacting with the candidates during registration, during the pre-exam portion, post-exam. And so during all of those, we're trying to maximize that 360-degree bubble of coverage before, during, and after. And what we've tried to do is, make greater use of all of that data that we are collecting, not just in, human analysis, but artificial intelligence analysis, to the point where, we are trying to fingerprint what a normal exam looks like, and then also train the AI to understand what anomalous exams look like. Again, not just how fast the candidate clicks the mouse or, where their eyes go on an exam, but, things like, and someone touched on it, where they log in to register compared to where they log in to take the exam, things like that. So 360 bubble analysis assisted by artificial intelligence. I think that's the future.
Roddy?
Yeah, I'd agree. I think AI is, for us, we see it more as a tool to use and an advantage, something that's really going to help us in security. We've really been embracing it. We're introducing it into some other surveillance platforms. We're doing some of the same stuff we're doing with remote with AI assisted proctoring now in testing centers. That's going to continue. Um, I think, I think for the credentialing organizations and especially in clear space, they are starting to also look at, remote and the stakes of their exams. Everyone rushed to it during the pandemic, as you mentioned, but since then, people have been stepping back a little bit. And sometimes they look at the stakes of their exams and they decide, do I want to be 100% remote or maybe deliver my lower stakes exams or use it remote for accommodations or someone where we don't have a testing center and putting their higher stakes exams back in the testing center. We see that happening, with some of our highest stakes, professional licensure clients. That's sort of a trend we see going on.
And
Yeah,
Wally?
line, I would just add to that. Yeah, it is definitely sort of the next gen AI type capabilities, right? We've seen where test takers are trying to use, a Gen AI client like ChatGPT or Claude to help them answer a question, because a lot of as the technology continues to mature, all you have to do is use your glasses and read the test question, and then AI can answer the test question for you, right? If you have an earpiece in your ear that isn't being detected or isn't being wanded correctly, or if there's no wanding for remote proctoring, you don't know that there's an earpiece in the ear giving, someone in another room seeing the screen and giving those answers. So Gen I is definitely, and AI is definitely the threat. And as Harry mentioned, all of our organizations are looking at how we can leverage AI to detect AI, prevent, detect, and respond to it. So that is a huge part of our focus going forward. And I think that, one, they'll definitely keep us busy for the foreseeable future, but that is the sort of the emerging threat, because, the face, the voice, those things that, controls that used to work 5 and 10 years ago are now going to have to be supplemented with new controls. So you'll always have the low technology, like the remote access, right? We're pretty good at those type of things. But the new and the emerging, the AI, the deep fakes, those are the ones where all of our programs have to be continuous. And that's why we have the support. And one of the reasons we're probably here today talking to you is we have to continually improve on those security programs, because our job is to protect the integrity of that exam so that it means something and it's not devalued in the industry, and it's a continuous. And so even though we all work for different companies, even coming here today shows that we're actually, when you hear our conversation, we're actually really aligned, right? So we might work for different companies and we might be competitors, we might be partners, whatever it may be, but we are aligned on the same mission.
Excellent. Well, this has certainly been a topic of very high importance in our licensing and credentialing world. And so I want to thank you all, Wally, Roddy, and Harry, for sharing your expertise with us today. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Yeah,
Thanks again for
absolutely.
having us.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, absolutely. And it has been a pleasure. And we'd like to continue this conversation with our members on our Clear Regulatory Network. Now, this podcast episode will be posted there, along with some questions for our members to consider, such as: what challenges has your organization faced in maintaining exam security, either in person or remotely, and how did you address them? With these rapid developments of AI and new technologies, what emerging risks to exam security concern you the most? And finally, what innovations or best practices would you like to see developed in the next 5 to 10 years to safeguard exam integrity? We greatly appreciate and thank our members for your discussion and feedback in the Clear Regulatory Network. And if you haven't already joined, we invite and encourage you to join that and take a part in these online discussions. I also want to thank our listeners for tuning in for this episode. We'll be back with another episode of Regulation Matters, a Clear Conversation, very soon. And if you're new to the Clear podcast, please subscribe to us. You can find us on Podbean or any of your favorite podcast services. And if you've enjoyed this podcast episode, please leave a rating or comment in the app. Those reviews help us to improve our ranking and make it easier for new listeners to find us. Feel free to visit our website at www.clearhq.org for additional resources, as well as a calendar of our upcoming programs and events. Finally, I'd like to thank our Clear staff, specifically Stephanie Thompson. She is our content coordinator and editor for this program. Once again, I'm Lyon Dempsey, and I hope to be speaking to you again very soon.